Hello everyone, and thanks once again for joining us for this Wednesday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm David Percy. Up first, we've got another intense, strong storm, comparable, almost as strong as the one from a week and a half ago, coming up into the Bering Sea, southwest Bering Sea, with a low center forecast to pass west of Attu and Shimia Island. So there's a high wind warning out from 12 p.m. Thursday, tomorrow, until 4 p.m. Friday, and that's for southwest winds of 60 to 80 miles per hour sustained, with gusts up to 100 miles per hour expected. And of course, the high winds may move loose objects and may damage property, and travel, especially walking, could be difficult. And again, that's a high wind warning out from Amchitka Island, right about there on the cursor, to Kiska, all the way out to Shimia and Attu, for winds gusts to 100 miles an hour. And next, there's a wind advisory out for the Alaska Range. Lighter winds there expected, but still in the advisory level. And that's for mainly the eastern Alaska Range, although it's a little farther to the west in the area they're covered than it was yesterday. But they're looking for, that's out currently, and will remain out until 10 a.m. Friday, so all night tonight, tomorrow, Thursday night into Friday morning. And that's for south winds sustained 25 to 40 miles an hour with gusts to 55 miles an hour, and those stronger winds expected through the Alaska Range passes. And from there, we go to satellite imagery. You can see low pressure right near Cape Newenham, spinning, slowly moving up to the northeast, and that's pushing several bands of moisture from south to north and northeast there. One showing up, kind of really weakening there, falling apart off the southeast coast. But there was some moisture coming up over the Panhandle initially that brought some rain in over the southern southeast coast today, leftover moisture from that old frontal boundary that was out there moving through for days on end, that brought the heavy rain to the northern Panhandle and eastern North Gulf Coast earlier. That's really not much of a factor anymore. And a weakening front and another band off to the west there, and some areas of rain. Heaviest rain today occurred at Kodiak Island, where they picked up over an inch during the day today. Then a break behind that over the Bering Sea, and then you can see the cirrus shield with ahead of the next big storm coming in later tonight, and especially tomorrow, into the western Aleutians and into the western or southwest Bering Sea area. You can see clouds spreading northward, mostly mid and high level clouds, some light precipitation there through the Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island area up to the northwest coast. Very light there, just mostly clouds, and mostly clouds over the interior there. Fairbanks area had after a mostly clear morning, thicker clouds moved in, and some clouds over the southwest interior with that low brought kind of a widespread area of light rain to that location. On the chart today, that front into southern Cook Inlet, pushing up across the Yukon Delta, lower Yukon River Valley area with a low center there, south of Togiak Bay or so, or somewhere in that general vicinity. And again, Kodiak picking up over an inch of rain today. Portage had over an inch and a half of precipitation. Otherwise, Sleep Mute in the southern Kuskokwim Valley, they picked up about a third of an inch of rain, and Anvik had half an inch of rain, along with Bethel had half an inch of rain also. Again, that's a 12-hour rainfall amount ending in the afternoon today. And over the Panhandle there, showers and rain kind of diminishing this afternoon. Klawock picked up a third of an inch of precipitation. Otherwise, lighter amounts elsewhere, and dry to the north and along the North Gulf Coast there. Yakutat and the northern Panhandle coast saw some clearing earlier on. Not too bad over the Copper River Basin into the interior, just variable clouds. And then flurries, gusty winds 25 to 30 miles an hour to the east-northeast. Temperatures in the upper 20s for the Arctic coast and North Slope, with some flurries and fog going on there, but really not much in the way of any accumulation of snow yet there. And pretty gusty winds out over the eastern Bering Sea. Let's see well, actually ahead of the front, pretty gusty winds, gale force winds, gusts 40 to 45 miles an hour occurred at Middleton Island and also at Iliamna ahead of the front there with Unalaska Unalakleet seeing east winds gusting to 35 miles an hour. And Palmer had southeast winds 30 to 35 miles an hour and wind gusts today. Of course, that being a downsloping wind flat kept it dry with temperatures in the mid-50s. And then pretty gusty winds from St. Lawrence Island down across the Pribilofs at 25 to 35 miles an hour into the Alaska Peninsula area and the eastern Aleutians with areas of rain through that area, but not very heavy, and then higher pressure out to the west there ahead of the next big storm. Tonight you can just start to see the tightening of the gradient there to the lower left-hand part of the picture. In advance of that, high pressure popping up between the two centers, one over the southwest interior. So that's going to make for quite a break for the central Aleutians into the Bering Sea. And low pressure will keep it wet from the Kotzebue Sound, Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, all across the southwest interior. Periods of rain and fog throughout the night tonight. Bristol Bay, the Alaska Peninsula, and Kodiak Island with that next trough. That front really weakens as it moves inland. Pretty dry over the interior valleys there. Most of the precipitation will occur along and south of the Alaska Range. Southern Copper River Basin. Still rain, moderate to briefly heavy, possible for the eastern North Gulf Coast. Showers over the Panhandle. Basically dry up over the interior. Maybe a snow flurry, a light snow shower in the Koyukuk Valley. Brooks Range. And a little bit about the same, no change from today for the Arctic coast and North Slope, but those winds pretty gusty there. St. Lawrence Island, just about gale force out in the north and northeast, right down along the coast. For tomorrow, there are gale warnings for the southwest coast, northwest winds at 40 knots, and strong winds also, pretty gusty for the Alaska Peninsula with areas of rain. Weakening front spreads rain into the Panhandle, mainly up north, more of a showery condition down to the south, and then that next intense storm coming into to just west of between the Komodorskis and the western Aleutians there. Very tight gradient, good enough probably for possible gusts to 100 miles per hour with rain moderate to heavy at times. Spreading over Amchitka Island throughout the day, but not quite making Adak, though you'll see an increase in the winds late in the afternoon tomorrow and eventually Atka Island as well. Otherwise, eastern Aleutians, just some showers possible with light winds, dry for the Pribilofs, light winds, and up north, just some flurries and fog possible with lighter winds on the eastern Arctic coast, so that low center forming there will kind of drop the winds off. And then for Friday, cold front there dropping down, brings snow to the eastern Arctic coast, eastern North Slope, into the Brooks Range, and maybe down into the Koyukuk Valley, with showers on the central Arctic coast. Otherwise, that storm weakening now, but still pretty intense, taking an eastward track toward the Pribilofs, front passing St. Paul and St. George. So you see definitely see some gale force winds with that ahead of the front. And still storm warnings, west winds 50 to 60 knots from Amchitka to Shimei and Attu, and probably even higher there north of the Aleutians toward the low center. Otherwise, light winds, Kodiak Island with possible sunshine, sun breaks into Cook Inlet too, showers scattered along the North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, and maybe along the Alaska Range. Weak system spreads rain, warm front rain, still could be kind of moderate there into the central Panhandle with periods of light rain for Yakutat. And looking at the lows tonight, upper 40s to lower 50s for the Panhandle, otherwise in the 40s, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay, South Central Alaska, North Gulf Coast, otherwise in the 30s in the interior valleys. Highs tomorrow, upper 40s to mid 50s, mid to upper 50s for the Panhandle, except lower 60s, Prince of Wales Island, Klawock, Heidelberg, and Ketchikan and Net. And then lows, 40s to lower 50s in the southeast coast, and upper 30s interior valleys, mid to upper 30s Bristol Bay now, otherwise in the lower 40s elsewhere. Highs upper 40s to lower 50s. Much of mainland Alaska there, including the North Gulf Coast. 55 to 60 for the Panhandle. Up north, lows in the 20s and 30s tonight, with highs tomorrow 40s to mid 50s, warmest around Fairbanks and North Pole. And lows the following morning in the 30s south of the Brooks Range, 20s from the Brooks Range of the Arctic coast, followed by highs 40s and lower 50s south of the Brooks Range, north of the mountains there in the 30s. Out to the southwest, lows tonight, upper 30s to lower 40s, highs 40s to lower 50s. Not much change there. Back to lows 40 to 45 for most areas. Mid-30s, though, up towards St. Lawrence Island and the Seward Peninsula. Along the southwest coast, closer to 40, and then again mid to upper 30s for Bristol Bay. Otherwise, mid-40s for Adak, and then highs on Friday afternoon, lower 40s for St. Lawrence Island, near 50 for the Pribilofs, and mid-50s Adak and Atka, lower 50s out towards Shemya, and 50 to 55 for the eastern Aleutians, with lower to mid-50s in the forecast for the Alaska Peninsula.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather. IFR for the Arctic coast and North Slope tomorrow, and a band extending down across the Seward Peninsula, St. Lawrence Island, and across the southwest interior to Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, southern Cook Inlet, and Kachemak, Resurrection Bay, Prince William Sound, southern Copper River Basin, mostly IFR for the Panhandle, and some IFR there up over the Yukon Flats, but areas of VFR in the central interior, and some good VFR over the central Bering Sea and from Adak eastward to the Alaska Peninsula, almost to Port Hayden. And for the afternoon, let's see, we've got IFR along the west coast, up across Seward Peninsula, Bering Strait, and covering the western and central Arctic coast. A little bit of VFR for the far eastern Arctic coast southward, all the way to the Alaska Range and into the central interior. And narrow band of IFR, eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range, across southern Cook Inlet, and then eastward and northeastward across Kachemak, Resurrection Bay, Prince William Sound, and Yakutat, eastern North Gulf Coast, most of the Panhandle IFR. IFR building out over the southwest Bering and western Aleutians, and that area pushes eastward there to Atka Island, improving behind it for Adak, Shemya, and that area IFR mostly lifting north of the Aleutians out in the Bering Sea. Conditions about to come down for the Pribilof Islands. Quite a bit of IFR over the interior, especially the northern and western interior, and a narrow band across, IFR for the Kuskokwim Valley, most of Cook Inlet, Kenai Peninsula, Prince William Sound, North Gulf Coast, southern Copper River Basin to Yakutat, improving over the Panhandle with IFR over the southern areas showing up. And into the IFR for the Pribilofs Friday afternoon. Same thing for the Fox Islands and the western Alaska Peninsula. IFR, Dillingham, Togiak Bay, Kuskokwim Bay, and the Delta. Maybe into southern Kuskokwim Valley. Some IFR, Arctic coast, and portions of the North Slope down to the eastern Brooks Range. VFR, northern Copper River Basin, and mid and upper Tanana Valley, 40-mile country to the southeastern Yukon Flats. IFR and marginal VFR for the Panhandle. And for passes, Hanatuvik, IFR, Adigan, marginal VFR. Lake Clark and Merrill go mostly IFR, especially on the eastern entrances of those two passes. And for Rainy, IFR eastern approach, otherwise marginal VFR. Windy, marginal VFR, VFR out the north entrance there, or into the valley. Same thing for Isabel, lowest conditions to pass south entrance, better to the north. Mintasta, optimistically, I'm going to go VFR for the day Thursday. And Tanita looks pretty marginal. Portage looks IFR, especially on the eastern entrance. And for the Chilkoot and White passes, IFR. Moving on to the freezing levels, kind of taking a jog to the north, 2,000 feet, now pushed back up off the Arctic coast there into the Arctic Ocean, 4,000 to 6,000 feet up over the eastern interior, and 8,000 feet over the northern Panhandle, maybe closer to 9,000 down toward Dixon Entrance. 2,000 feet just north of the Aleutians and the central Bering Sea, but ahead of that big storm, warmer air coming northward on the southerly winds, 8,000 feet over the western Aleutians. With that will be considerable moderate rime icing, possibly even maybe severe, possibly. Otherwise, for the western Aleutians, and then areas of isolated moderate rime or maybe mixed icing across southern Alaska from the southeast Bering Sea, possibly considerable moderate there on the north coast of the Panhandle. Icing free for the northern interior. And for the jet stream, upper level lows, one over the Seward Peninsula near Shishmaref, another one right around Shelikof Strait there. Good, strong northerly winds, northwest 105 to 140 knots across eastern Aleutians, southwest 85 knots into the eastern North Gulf Coast. 9,000 feet shows up that next big storm coming in, 100 knots southwest winds right across Shimei and Attu. Otherwise, northerlies at 50 across the Alaska Peninsula. and some pretty brisk south to southwest winds coming into the southeast interior and the panhandle. And at 9,000 or 3,000 feet, 45 knot winds into the southeast coast, north 50 knots southeast Bering Sea across the Alaska Peninsula, south 40 knots there for Prince William Sound and St. Lawrence Island, 95 knots south winds coming into Shimei and Attu there, with increasing winds pretty strong heading in toward Amchitka Island. Turbulence. Look for isolated severe below 8,000 feet for the western Aleutians. Considerable moderate chop, eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, areas of the North Gulf Coast and Panhandle, as well as St. Lawrence Island, the Bering Strait, and the western.
It's kind of hard to explain how important weather is to our job. I mean, it really affects everything we do.
In 2018, NOAA launches the GOES-S satellite, which takes its place in orbit as GOES-17. Working together with GOES-16, the two new geostationary weather satellites will provide constant watch over the United States and the Western Hemisphere, from the west coast of Africa all the way to New Zealand, helping monitor severe storms, wildfires, and daily weather patterns. Since its launch, NOAA's GOES-16 satellite has already demonstrated its critical capability for keeping our nation weather ready. Throughout the active 2017 hurricane season, GOES-16 delivered imagery with detail and clarity never achieved before, with 4 times greater resolution than previous NOAA satellites, and delivered this imagery faster than ever before, helping forecasters predict the path of a storm and where and when it will intensify. These accurate and timely forecasts allowed for emergency managers to prepare for evacuations, map flood areas, and save lives.
So the weather matters. The weather matters before the weather happens, and the weather matters after the event happens, because what we're able to do to prepare, allocate resources, provide information to the public through the media beforehand, and what we're able to do afterwards, how and when the waters are going to recede, so we know we can get vehicles with life-saving food and shelter equipment down a particular highway. All of that depends on the forecast.
In the GOES West position, GOES-17 will be able to provide critical data for the westernmost United States, Alaska, and Hawaii.
We're talking about getting data updates in just seconds, so we can quickly spot wildfires and closely monitor the wind direction and their intensity. The crispness of the data coming in at a faster rate will also help with fog forecasts. We can see the moment the stratus starts to develop or when it starts to move out.
Like GOES-16, GOES-17 carries a suite of advanced instruments, including tools for sophisticated earth sensing, lightning detecting, solar imaging, and space weather monitoring. As an equal partner in the sky, GOES-17 will expand coverage of the advanced baseline imager technology across the Pacific Ocean, allowing meteorologists and local officials to see severe weather systems developing in real time.
So instead of seeing something, say, this large, that as you zoom in actually gets kind of blurry, you're actually going to see something that is much more detailed.
In its GOES West position, GOES-17 will be able to monitor conditions in the western U.S. like wildfires, coastal fog, and atmospheric rivers when storms from the Pacific dump heavy rain and snow over the western U.S. GOES-17 will have a major impact on fighting wildfires in California. Up-to-the-minute information and crisp detail allows forecasters to spot fires faster than ever before, even before the first 911 calls come in, and to better track and predict the path of large, dynamic, and dangerous fires.
It's amazing to see what we can get and at the level of detail and the speed that we can get the information down into the ground that makes our decision-making way more accurate.
With a view of the Pacific Ocean, GOES-17 will also provide a critical eye over shipping lanes vital to the U.S. economy, protecting cargo and passenger vessels from dangerous ocean storms. GOES-17 will also provide a high-definition view over Alaska, resulting in better weather forecasts and improved monitoring of sea ice, wildfires, and volcanic ash. The advanced baseline imager on GOES-17 can distinguish between clouds, sea ice, and snow cover, a critical need during Alaska's dark, cloudy winter months. GOES 17's geostationary lightning mapper monitors lightning flashes, including the in-cloud lightning most prevalent in severe storms, helping forecasters determine when a storm is forming, intensifying, and becoming more dangerous. Thanks to GOES 17, emergency managers will be equipped with more accurate weather predictions and faster warnings, providing a real impact, saving lives, and protecting infrastructure. Watching over Earth from 22,300 miles above, GOES S will provide vital data to our weather-ready nation.
Hi, I'm JPSS. I'm a high-tech weather satellite that orbits our planet. I do something called a polar orbit. I circle the Earth from North Pole to South Pole, over and over, while the Earth spins. While I do that, I get lots of information about what's going on around the globe. I watch storms, clouds, and rain. I take the temperature of the ocean, measure air quality, ozone health, and take pictures of the land and sea. This information is used for all kinds of things. It helps us take care of our coasts and oceans and all the amazing things that live there. It helps us monitor harmful weather events like floods and droughts and measure the health of the environment. Most importantly, it helps us predict weather 3 to 7 days in the future. That means I can be a big help ahead of storms, where future warnings are important. I send information to the National Weather Service. They use the information to create forecasts. The forecasts are shared with people all over the country to help prepare for weather emergencies. So you look to the sky and wave. I'll be flying by.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Moving on to the marine forecast for the south coast along the panhandle there. South winds 20 to 25 knots and small craft advisories on the north coast for south to southeast winds 25 knots, seas 11 feet. Small craft advisories also for Lynn Canal Glacier Bay, northern inner channels for south winds at 25 knots. Stevens Passage, southeast winds 20 knots with higher gusts, and Clarence Strait looking at a south wind on Thursday of 20 knots with 5-foot seas. And moving ahead to Friday, a little bit windier there, especially along the south coast, south to southeast winds 30 knots, seas about 12 feet. Small craft advisories on the north coast, southeast 25 to 30 knot winds, and lighter winds for the northern inner channels there, south at 15, Stevens Passage, southeast at 20. Small craft advisories Friday for Clarence Strait, southeast winds 25 knots. For the North Gulf Coast, tomorrow, south winds at 20 knots, seas around 10 feet. Prince William Sound, winds will be out of the southeast primarily at about 20 knots with 4-foot seas. And for the Barren Islands, southwest winds at 20 knots. Small craft advisories for Kamishak Bay, southeast winds 25 knots. Southern Cook Inlet, northeast winds 25 knots, north of the Forelands, northeast at 20. And for Friday, for Cook Inlet, south to southwest winds 15 knots, seas about 3 feet. For the Kamishak Bay zone, the Barren Islands, western North Gulf Coast, all looking at a southwest wind at 15 knots, eastern North Gulf Coast, southwest at 20. And Prince William Sound, southeast winds 15 knots. Kodiak Island, Thursday, small craft advisories, southwest winds 25 knots. And gale warnings for the Bering Sea side of the Alaska Peninsula, northwest winds 30 knots, seas about 16 feet. And Bristol Bay, gale warnings also, west winds at 35 knots with 12-foot seas. Lighter winds in store Friday for Bristol Bay, south at 20 knots with 5-foot seas. And the Alaska Peninsula, west-southwest winds 20 to 25 knots. Kodiak Island, southwest winds 15 to 25 knots. And for the eastern Aleutians for Thursday, northwest winds 20 to 30 knots, seas 7 to 14 feet. Central Aleutians, West winds 25 knots, seas 5 to 7 feet. Storm warnings, Kiska Island to Shemya for southeast winds 50 to 60 knots, seas building to 27 feet. And then on Friday, from Shemya to Kiska, west winds 60 knots, seas 35 feet. Amchitka Island, storm warnings continue, southwest winds 55 knots, seas 31 feet. And gale force winds for the central Aleutians, 35 to 45 knots. And for gale warnings for Unimak Island, southwest 35 to 40 knots, and 30 knot winds from the west-southwest for Unalaska Island. For the southwest coast tomorrow, gale warnings, sustained northwest winds at 40 knots, northwest 40 knot winds also for St. Matthew Island, gale warnings for the Purblos, northwest winds 35 knots, St. Lawrence Island, gale warnings, north winds 35 knots, seas at 10 feet. And for Friday, south winds 30 knots for the Purblos, but seas still up to 20 feet. East winds 45 knots for the St. Matthew Island area with 22-foot seas. Yukon Delta coast, east winds at 20. St. Lawrence Island, northeast 25. And the Kuskokwim Delta coast, south at 25 knots. Gale warnings for the eastern, far eastern Arctic coast, out of the east at 35 knots, otherwise dropping off to 20 knots on the central coast, turning northeast at 20 on the western Arctic coast. Cape Beaufort to Wales, small craft advisories for north winds at 25 knots. And for Friday, from Wales to Cape Beaufort, north winds 20 knots. Western central Arctic coast, same thing, north winds at 20 knots, 4 to 6 foot seas. And for the eastern Arctic coast, west winds now at 20 to 25 knots with 5 to 6 foot seas. For tonight, low pressure moves in over the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, and that'll keep that area wet from the Alaska Peninsula all the way down to Bristol Bay and northward to the Seward Peninsula, Kodiak Island, occasional rain and fog, and gusty winds starting to diminish tonight when the front pushes through for the channeled areas, Turnagain Arm, Palmer area, for example, with areas of rain. Moderate rain for the eastern North Gulf Coast, showers lingering over the Panhandle. And for tomorrow, big storm comes in to just west of Shemya and Attu. High wind warning out for 100-mile-an-hour wind gusts from Shemya and Attu to Amchitka Island. Otherwise, rain continues with wind for Alaska Peninsula, southwest coast, and southern Alaska. Weakening front brings rain into the Panhandle. That storm tracks eastward on Friday. Have a good evening.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.